Hey guys, Endless here, welcome back to the channel. This is part 9 for What If Deku Had Cursed Speech. Also check out the other videos on my playlists. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy. Izuku and Katsuki made their way out of Recovery Girl's office and the two looked at one another and sighed. They both had missed the announcement for the winner of the sports festival. Since Izuku had won and he had been injured, so All Might just announced that the first place winner was Izuku Midoriya. As both boys made their way out of the stadium, the duo heard a cough from behind. "Now you weren't going to leave without me, were you?" said Toshinori, in his normal form. The green-haired boy glanced at the man and replied, "Salmon." All Might just sweat drop at this, and Katsuki had spoke up. "Are we going to Gran Torino's for the transfer?" the blonde questioned. After the number one hero had heard this, he nodded and called his driver. Izuku and Katsuki stared at All Might, then at the expensive limo that just parked right next to them. Said hero noticed their surprised looks and just shrugged. "Being number one has its perks and I usually just save up." After he said this, the trio made their way inside the vehicle and All Might told the driver the directions to Gran Torino's home. 30 minutes later, everyone got out of the car and Katsuki had stretched and Izuku just rubbed his throat. "I wonder if I can get cough syrup," the green-haired boy thought. He then thought back to earlier when Recovery Girl was healing them. Both boys had got chewed out by said heroine saying something about, "You should hold back and not taking a fight that seriously when it's against friends." However, Katsuki had retorted blankly, "How will we know who is stronger if we don't go all out?" Smack. Safe to say that Katsuki had a bump on his head for the whole car ride. Anyways, back to the story. All Might knocked on the door and waited for a moment. About 10 seconds later the door opened and it was revealed to be Gran Torino in his hero outfit. He stared at Toshinori, then at the two brats. "So you guys came back for more torture, I mean training?" After the duo had heard this, they stared at one another and both thought, "Can we go home now?" As they thought this, Gran Torino looked over towards All Might. Said blonde nodded and walked over towards the car to tell the driver something. As this happened, Izuku was looking around for a store, but that's when Gran Torino threw something towards the green-haired boy. Said boy caught it and stared at the cough syrup in his hand. He then smiled at the older hero. "Salmon." Gran Torino just grunted and walked towards the car with the two boys following after. Now we skip to 20 minutes later. Izuku and Katsuki got out of the car and stared at the forest in front of them. Mustard leaf. The blonde just sighed and they walked into the forest to their training area. Once they did, All Might stared at Katsuki critically and Gran Torino just crossed his arms and stared at the trio in front of him. "Alright young man, I think your body is ready for one for all." As he said this, the number one hero plucked a piece of his hair and brought it to Katsuki's face. Bakugo stared at the hair, then at All Might. "Nope." After he said this, All Might frowned and that's when Izuku grinned. "Caviar, tuna." Katsuki gritted his teeth and snatched the hair out of the symbol's hand. "I am not scared of hair." He then muttered, "This will be gross." Bakugo then swallowed the hair and held back the urge to throw up. As this was happening, Izuku was laughing at his side. After Gran Torino saw the duo, he smirked and thought, "This reminds me of when Toshinori got one for all from Nana." 2 minutes later, Katsuki coughed and stood up. Izuku saw this and handed him a water bottle and said blonde took it. As he did so, Bakugo gave a grateful nod towards his friend. All Might then spoke up to the duo after a moment. "It will take a few hours to show, or you both could spar with me and see if it awakens during the fight." Both boys stared at one another and grinned. "Salmon." Bakugo smirked and started to stretch with Izuku following after him. He then walked to the side and All Might transformed into his buff form. As this was happening, Gran Torino jumped onto a tree and sat down on a branch while eating popcorn. "This will be good," the man thought. The duo stared at All Might and waited for him to make the first move. However, after a few seconds, Izuku pulled down his scarf and he shouted, "Body enhancement, plus accelerate." The green-haired boy dashed towards the symbol of peace and launched a punch towards the man. All Might saw this and dodged the punch and he roared, "Texas Smash." Izuku's eyes went wide and he got sent back with a boom. But as he got launched to the lake behind him, Katsuki roared from the air, "AP shot, autocannon." Boom. Bakugo huffed and stared at the smoke that was created by his explosions in anticipation. He then heard a roar from within said smoke. New Hampshire Smash. All Might flew towards Katsuki and said Blonde couldn't move in time, but that's when. Don't move, plus blast away. The blonde hero got stopped in his tracks and got sent towards the trees behind him with a thud. Izuku huffed and got out of the lake. He moved his hair to the side and he and Katsuki locked eyes. Both boys nodded a second later and Izuku shouted, "Body enhancement double, plus wind pressure." Katsuki grinned and felt lighter and stronger. He then got into a stance when he heard All Might shout, "Detroit Smash." In response, both boys launched an attack of their own. Katsuki put both arms in front of him and his muscles tensed. Die. As this happened, Izuku roared, all the while the wind pressure around his hand flared. Expand. Both attacks collided together and made it double the size of the explosions from Katsuki's gauntlets. However, their combined attack and All Might's attack connected with one another with a boom. Said Hero smirked when he got sent back a little and he thought, maybe I should use 50%. After he thought this, All Might's eyes glowed blue. California Smash. Wait, what, tuna? Both boys had shouted in surprise. Because All Might's attack overpowered Izuku's and Katsuki's and both boys got sent towards the lake once again with a splash. All Might huffed and that's when Gran Torino landed by his side. You know they are just getting warmed up, right? Toshinori stared at Gran Torino and asked with a raised eyebrow. How do you know this? Torihiko grinned and activated his quirk and jumped into the air. Because I trained them, did you forget already? As he did this, Izuku roared. Foothold, plus lightning bolt. The number one hero stared at the two boys on top of the lake and jumped to the side. As he did so, the lightning bolt had hit the spot that he was standing at with a boom. Izuku gritted his teeth and blood started to come out from his mouth. He wiped away said blood and thought, I'm already bleeding with those few attacks. The green-haired boy stared at All Might and thought back to the fight they had with the Nomu. It's just like what happened that time. As he thought this, Katsuki roared. Blasting speed turbo, cluster. The blonde dashed towards All Might with explosions following after him. He then spun in the air and that's when Izuku grinned. Accelerate, plus expand. All Might saw this and muttered. Oh crap. He then launched his fist back and roared. Texas Smash. As he launched his punch forward, Katsuki roared as well. Combined attack, improved howitzer cyclone. Both attacks had connected and sent another massive shockwave throughout the forest with a boom. Izuku and Katsuki jumped back and the green-haired boy muttered. Get crushed. After he said this, the ground beneath All Might cracked and said Hero grinned all the while being forced onto one knee. Wow, I didn't expect this much of a workout from UA students. As said Hero said this, Bakugo appeared at his side and launched an explosion-powered kick to the man's face. Well, you shouldn't underestimate us. The kick was about to connect, but that's when All Might thought. 100% one for all. He then broke free of Izuku's control and caught the blonde's kick. Bakugo stared at All Might and muttered. Please don't throw me. However, All Might just retorted bluntly. No. He then launched Bakugo towards Izuku. The green-haired boy had saw this and got into a stance and roared. Don't move, plus blast away. After he said this, Katsuki was stopped in place and then he got launched towards All Might once again. What is this Bakugo pinball machine? As he shouted this, a yellow spark appeared by his arm and he launched a punch with an explosion. All Might's eyes went wide at the massive explosion that was sent towards him and he launched a punch to the ground with a roar. New Hampshire smash. As he did this, there was 2 consecutive booms. Katsuki gritted his teeth and cried out in pain. What the hell is this? Why is it broken? As he said this, All Might landed onto the ground and he stared at Bakugo's now broken arm. Why did it activate so quick? Did the quirk answer to his emotions? Izuku and Gran Torino walked up towards Katsuki and the green-haired boy drank some of his cough syrup. He then stared at the blonde's arm and thought to himself, I hope this works. The green-haired boy then muttered, fast recovery. After he said this, Katsuki's arm went from dark purple to a lighter shade, then after a moment it looked as it did before he launched the punch. Katsuki stared at his arm in wonder, then back at Izuku, who for his part coughed out some blood. You idiot, why do you try new stuff? The blonde shouted angrily. As this happened, Gran Torino shouted towards All Might. Bring him the water by the tree. Izuku stared at the ground and grinned. I can heal my throat when it gets too bad. However, he coughed up some more blood and then he muttered, fish flakes. After Bakugo had heard this, he growled, no sure dash. Smack. Gran Torino huffed and glared at Katsuki. You shouldn't curse. As this happened, All Might handed Izuku the bottle of water and Izuku drank it all in one gulp. But now we time skip to 4 days later. Within this time, Izuku and Katsuki continued to train together and had a few spars. Katsuki had learned to control about 6% of One for All and now he is able to use the quirk to empower his explosions. Now both boys stood next to Gran Torino and that's when the old man spoke up. We will be going for a patrol, so you guys can see what it's like to be a hero. He then stared at the duo in front of him and spoke with a dangerous tone. If you disobey my orders, I will make sure your training is twice as hard. Izuku and Katsuki gulped and nodded. Gran Torino smirked after he saw this and ushered the 2 boys inside the bullet train behind him. Both boys followed after the man and found a seat. As they sat down, that's when Katsuki spoke up while rubbing his wrists. So where are we going? Salmon. The older hero stared out of the window then back at the 2 boys. We are going near Hosu City. As he said this, Izuku's eyes went wide. He then pulled out his phone and typed into it. He then pressed speaker. Didn't Tenya choose a hero agency close to there? After Izuku put his phone away, Katsuki frowned. Why are you talking about 4 eyes? His eyes also went wide at the realization. Ingenium was attacked in Hosu City. After Gran Torino had heard this, he frowned and asked, is the younger brother going after the hero killer? After both boys nodded, he was about to speak again, but that's when there was a crash. Gran Torino quickly intercepted the Nomu and shouted towards the 2 boys behind him. Stay in here. After he said this, Sorahiko had used his quirk and jumped out the train with the Nomu. Katsuki and Izuku stared at one another and jumped out of the train not a moment later. Both boys want to save their classmate. In Hosu City, same time. Tenya was walking around the city next to Manuel, though his attention was in the alleyways they keep passing. Manuel had noticed this and spoke in a commanding tone. I know what happened to your brother, and being a hero isn't about revenge. Tenya stared at the hero and just nodded his head. But as he did, there was a boom right next to them. After Manuel had saw this, he dashed towards the explosion and shouted towards Tenya. Follow after me. The blue-haired boy did so without a second thought. But as he did, Tenya heard a scream in the alley right next to him. He stared at the dark alley, then at the normal hero's retreating form. Without a second thought, he dashed inside the alley with his engine. As he dashed away, Manuel was able to get to where the explosion happened. "Back with Tenya," said Boy. Dashed through the alley and thought to himself, "I will avenge you, Nissan." As he thought this, Tenya heard another scream to his right. Without a second thought, Tenya turned the corner and launched a high kick towards Stain. Said man halted his swing and brought his arm up in defense. The blow connected and sent the man flying to the wall with a thud. The blue-haired boy then roared towards the hero killer. "You were the one who hurt my brother, I will make you pay." The hero killer growled and got up. As he did so, the rubble fell to the side harmlessly. "Brother?" the man questioned. He then got a good look of the newcomer and grinned. "Oh, you mean Ingenium? I didn't want to hurt a true hero, but I had to." He then frowned at the anger in the boy's eyes. "Boy, why don't you save that man instead of going for vengeance?" As he said this, Tenya glanced at the down native, but he quickly turned his attention back towards Stain. "My name isn't Boy, it is Ingenium. It's the name of the man you crippled." As he said this, Tenya dashed towards Stain and launched another high kick towards the man. The hero killer had saw this and dodged the kick and launched a knife towards Tenya's leg. Said Boy cried out in pain and got sent towards the ground. "So you are a fake as well?" the man spoke in a cold tone. Tenya gritted his teeth and pulled the knife out and threw it to the side. But as he did so, the hero behind him shouted in worry, "Don't let him lick your blood, after he cut me I couldn't move." The blue-haired boy stared at the hero and thought, "Blood?" But as he thought this, the hero killer roared, "Too slow." He then launched another knife towards Tenya, but as he did, said man grabbed the knife that Tenya had threw. Stain then grinned darkly and spoke in the same tone from earlier. "Then you will be a sacrifice for a more just world." He then licked the blade and Tenya froze and fell onto the ground. Stain walked up to the down boy and stared at his eyes once again. "You aren't fit to be a hero." After he said this, Stain pulled out his blade and held it over his head. As he did this, Tenya shouted back in anger, "How dare you lecture me when you did that to my brother?" Stain just grinned at this and did a downward slash with his blade. The blue-haired boy had saw this and closed his eyes. But as he did, Tenya heard a shout from behind. "Don't move, plus blast away." Stain's eyes went wide when his sword was stopped an inch from Tenya's head, and that's when he got sent back with a boom. As this happened, Katsuki checked over Native and Tenya. "We will destroy him, don't worry." After the blonde had said this, Lita shouted towards the duo, "Why are you here? This is my fight, don't get involved." Izuku stared at his down friend and he frowned. "Tuna, salmon." After Bakugo had heard this, he raised his hand up and smack. Tenya's eyes went wide and he stared at Bakugo in shock, and that's when the blonde spoke up. "Shut up, being a hero isn't about vengeance." He then stood up and held his fist out towards Izuku, who bumped said fist with a grin. "It's about winning and making sure to save people." After he said this, Stain grinned and roared, "You two aren't half bad, now show me what true heroes are like." But that is the end of this part. If you enjoyed this part, leave a comment and let me know what you guys thought of said part. Also leave a like for a cookie.